A week of hate and violence grips the country. South Florida is not immune.
I wouldn't define myself as a neo-Nazi. I would define myself as a white nationalist, maybe.
South Florida white nationalists are back from Charlottesville, and you will hear from one.
You're going to take down statues to George Washington. How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him?
The president defends Confederate statues. Are they history or are they hate? Good morning. So great to have you with us. As always, the hate and the debate dominated the conversation this week, and in South Florida, it hits home.
Does it ever? In the week since Charlottesville, the president has equated the white supremacists and neo-Nazis who marched there and those who were protesting against them.
I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it.
The president's statements drew a sharp rebuke from Americans across the political spectrum who were shocked by not hearing the president immediately denounce white supremacists and neo-Nazis marching with torches like Nazis in Hitler's Germany or members of the Ku Klux Klan. And they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us."
Across the South, Confederate statues and memorials that have stood largely unnoticed and untouched for decades were and are targeted now for takedown. Many say it's about time. Others call them important U.S. history.
President Trump tweeted his support, sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. You can't change history, but you can learn from it. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, who's next? Washington, Jefferson, so foolish. Also, the beauty that is being taken out of our cities, towns, and parks will be greatly missed and never able to be comparably replaced.
We begin right there with our guests. State Representative Chevron Jones, Democrat from West Park. He plans to file a state bill to purge Confederate memorials from public property.
Howard Simon is the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Florida, the ACLU. It has its headquarters in Miami.
David Barkey is counsel for the Anti-Defamation League's Southeast office. That's in Boca Raton. He regularly also trains federal, state, and local law enforcement on combating hate crime. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So much for being
Great
with
to
us
have
today.
you all come in. Representative Jones, let's begin with you. You say you're going to introduce a bill in Tallahassee in the coming session that would cause the removal of all Confederate statues, memorials from public spaces in the state of Florida. Why do you want to do this?
Well, yes. Well, first I'll say this is I don't want to make this the battle of the statues because
what is it the battle of?
If the battle, America has a race problem. And we have a race problem here within our country. So I know for a fact taking the monuments down is not going to change the mindset of people. We get that. But no one walking onto public property should be greeted with with trophies of hate of individuals who divided this country. I'm not saying destroy them. Put them in museums where people can go and learn about the history. But we should not have them in the beginning, in the opening of public places. To be memorialized as if they done some good to this country.
Yeah, Representative, before we broaden this out a little bit, there is an issue right now in the city of Hollywood.
Yes.
3 streets in the city of Hollywood named for the Ku Klux Klan founder, one of
Yes.
them, and General Robert E. Lee of the Confederacy.
Yes.
John Hood. This is an issue in front of the Hollywood Commission right now. On August 30th, we'll decide whether to change those street names. You were at the initial first hearing in June.
Yes.
Where there was a melee there. What is it about these street names being changed that is so offensive to people when the street names themselves are so offensive to people who live there?
Yeah, Glenn, I'll be honest with you. What I think is happening is people have become more educated in who these individuals are and were. And when you look at the street names, and as people become more educated, they're more or less like, yeah, there's no need for them to know what these individuals stood for. Let's not live on a street with someone who enslaved and raped and killed African Americans. Let's replace these names with maybe numbers, or put them with individuals who were in the city of Hollywood who changed the trajectory of the city. And no one wants to live with that type of hate on their street.
I would also say that these statutes, particularly what we saw in Charlottesville, they're a pretext. I mean, they're a pretext for white supremacists and neo-Nazis. I don't think those folks were really going there because of a Confederate statute. They were going there to send a message about quote-unquote white nationalism. They went there armed. Sure. They went there to incite violence. And something I think is very important to remember, I mean, what these Confederate statutes represent, it's a sanitized history of the Confederacy. I mean, we in the Jewish community, you cannot forget your history. It's very important to remember the awful history of what the Confederacy represented. It's a question of what do you do with that history? What do you do with these statutes? You know, do you contextualize it? Do you put it in a museum? We certainly support your bill and efforts to remove statutes. But the one thing I would say, I heard a reverend say something very interesting on the news yesterday. It's not just the statute, it's the statutes. Because there's legacies from this. There are legacies in Florida. For instance,
Jim Crow laws were written between 1890 and 1920 when the statutes, most of them went up.
So look, I want to say I really appreciate the efforts of the state representative. The statues should come down. They're symbols of oppression and slavery. They're symbols of also, let's bear in mind, not only symbols of oppression, but symbols of a group that tried to destroy the United States. They're symbols of people who are acting treasonous. But as important as it is to take down the statues, I want to say we've got to extricate ourselves from the policies that we still live under. And I'm hoping that next year...
Which policies?
Well, criminal justice policies, police policies, and voting policies. And I'm hoping that next year the people of the state of Florida will have an opportunity to drag us kicking and screaming out of this era and end lifetime felon disfranchisement, which comes from 1868. So it's the policies, not only the statutes.
It's definitely the policies that we're dealing with. And when you look at, that's why I said it's not about the statutes. There are laws that are in place right now when we talk about minorities, from our criminal justice system to education to economic development within our communities. Those are the real issues that we're dealing with within our communities.
The statutes, let me argue the other side for a minute. The statutes, you know, as distasteful, offensive as they may be, especially to an African American, are part of our history. Let me put up a quote here from Peggy Noonan from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Had a column in which she addressed this, and she made, I think, a good point. She said, when a nation tears down its statues, it's toppling more than brass and marble. It is, in a way, toppling itself, tearing down all the things, good, bad, and inadequate, that made it, or rather everyone. Not all of what made America is good. Does anyone even think this? But why try to hide from that?
Well, I mean, what I would say is that these statutes, I mean, we're very supportive of the approach that Mayor Landrieu of New Orleans took with taking down their statutes there. And if you haven't read it, I recommend the speech that he gave when he took it down, because it's an excellent speech because, as I said, these statutes are an attempt to sanitize history of this noble lost cause. But he quotes, and I'll read this from the cornerstone speech of the VP, the Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, who said, "The Confederacy's cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal conditions. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth." I don't think that that ugly historical context is contextualized when you look at one of these statutes. Now, if you want to keep a statute in place, but you have an exhibit there saying this is what this is really about, but I mean, and I'm not a historian, but my understanding is that these statutes were put up for two reasons. One, to sanitize ugly history, and two, to say, this is who's in control when they were put up.
To your point, actually, there is an organization called Daughters of the Confederacy who was very instrumental. Howard, I know you're a student of history, was very instrumental in putting up these monuments and markers and statues of Confederate soldiers in the 1910s and 20s, long after the Civil War ended, for the purpose of, I don't want to say rewriting history, but certainly giving another context to the men who fought.
Exactly. There are 700 of these monuments scattered throughout the Old South. Most of them were put up between 1900 and the 1950s. They are more a statement of Jim Crow and more a statement of reinforcing white supremacy. Yeah. With all due respect to Peggy Newton, I think she's spouting nonsense. You'll have Justin Safey on later. Ask him. Remember when Jeb Bush quietly removed some of the symbols of the Confederacy and put it in the appropriate place in a museum?
In the State
That's where
Historical
it
Museum.
is part of our history. Nobody's talking about sanitizing our history. We're talking about the appropriate place for it.
Representative, have you spoken to anyone about this bill that you're filing? What kind of reaction are you getting from that?
Oh, my social media is mixed. It's mixed signals. But a lot of people they're happy that that I'm going to file the bill. But their review is the same thing as I'm saying, that it's more than just a statue. It'll be a different story when we get to Tallahassee to see how my colleagues who come from various parts of the state look at this bill.
They say South Florida is the most northern part of Florida there is.
House Speaker Richard Corcoran was quoted in the Miami Herald as not being very enthusiastic about it. And I don't even think you're filing this maybe to pass it, but to begin a larger discussion or to continue it.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. There's a larger discussion that needs to happen. I did speak with the speaker and to let him know that this is the direction that we're going in. And I'll say it like this: if this is the direction that we can go in to have the larger conversation, then so be it. If it's the statutes that's going to bring us to the table to talk about the oppression of African Americans in education, the oppression of minorities and immigration, if this is going to bring us to the table, then so be it. Then let's have the real conversation. Because I think America, we have come to a place where 45, that's his name, has created such a division within this country.
The President of the United States.
All right, we'll come back and talk about President 45, President Trump, and also other things. Stay with us. We'll be back with our guest in just a minute. Welcome back. So much to talk about this morning with our guests. They include State Representative Sherwin Jones of West Park, Howard Simon of the ACLU, David Barkey, General Counsel of the ADL, Southeast United States, from Boca Raton. This week, on Friday, our very fine reporter Amy Viteri went out and found a white nationalist who went to Charlottesville, came back, and she spoke with him about why he went and what he found. Let's listen to this sound.
What was your impression of the events in Charlottesville?
It was beautiful.
What about the woman who lost her life?
Shouldn't be standing out in traffic, I suppose.
But it was a street filled with people, and
Well,
somebody
I watched-
drove right into them.
Well, there's tons of YouTube videos, so I suggest people check those out. I will not be silenced. I have no fears, and this is what America was built on.
Well, a brief insight into why one person went. This is a fellow who lives in Coral Springs. And David, part of what the ADL does is study hate groups. I mean, you train police on how to deal with hate groups. When you hear these kind of comments, what do you think?
Well, I think what's important to know is that people shouldn't think that extremism, white supremacism, neo-Nazis is something that happens someplace else. We certainly have them in the state of Florida, and what's also important to realize is that many extremists are not affiliated with a particular group. They're not a card-carrying member of the Klan or National Socialist Movement. They're what we call lone wolves, unaffiliated extremists who unfortunately can get radicalized online from the comfort of their home. You know, with the boon of the internet's a great thing, but no longer do you have to attend a meeting or go out someplace to buy an extremist publication. So we certainly have groups in Florida. We have Klan groups, we have neo-Nazi groups, we have alt-right groups, but also there are plenty of unaffiliated people.
You know, a lot of people this week are parsing the words of the president. I believe, Representative, you started to talk about that. Parsing the words of elected officials, did they go far enough? A lot of people are blaming the candidacy of Donald Trump for empowering groups like this. Yet, if you look at the Southern Poverty Law Center statistics, hate groups, the number of hate groups went up in 2010 and 11, came down in right after that, in the year after that, and then began going up again before the candidacy of Donald Trump. Howard Simon, what does that show, the rise and fall and rise again of these kind of hate groups?
I think it shows the need for leadership. Look, we're a First Amendment organization. We protect the First Amendment. All views have a right to be expressed. The First Amendment protects peaceful assembly, but there's no moral equivalency. I have to say that the difficulty that our president had in condemning anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi, Klan hate groups, I think disgraced the office of the president. So while these groups have a right to express their views peacefully, they're not on an equal footing here.
We have been watching video from a really remarkable piece of journalism on Vice News that went and was embedded with the white nationalist, white supremacist, and Representative Jones, here it is, and here these guys carrying torches reminiscent of KKK rallies or the Bund in Germany. As I say, I think this looks like 1937 in Berlin or something. Jews will not replace us. You will not replace us. Blood and soil, which was a Hitlerian Nazi chant. I mean, it is shocking to think that in this country, Americans can be saying things like this 70 years after a war that tried to of people who tried to destroy us.
Yeah, I saw the very thing, Mike, and I mean, my eyes watered up now because you think that we have come to a better place in America, to where we can get along with each other, we can love our neighbor. You would think that we have gotten to this place, but to see that when I watched that on Vice News is very disheartening. And I just believe that our president, he missed a great opportunity to bridge the gap and bring us back together. And when you have individuals who are holding torches and saying you will not replace us, and calling names, and I think that it's again, it goes back to America. We have a problem, we have a race issue that needs to be dealt with.
But I think it's important to point out that these groups have always existed in the United States, but it's an issue of containment and keeping them on the fringe of society. Right. And at ADL, we're based in the Jewish community. We know that words matter. The Holocaust, it didn't start with the death camps, it started with words. So I agree with Howard, I agree with the representative that we need leadership. There's no equivocating on prejudice. There's no equating neo-Nazis and counter-protesters, but I think an important message that we've been getting out is if the president is going to stand up, we need to stand up. Our communities need to stand up. Something that ADL did this week with the U.S. Conference of Mayors was to create a 10-point compact on how to combat hate, bias, and bigotry that 200+ mayors have signed on to. So this week...
What is your plan? I mean, give us a couple of those points.
A couple of points. Some of those basic points, that whenever hate arises in your community, you vigorously speak out, that you punish hate crimes to the fullest extent of the law, that you encourage anti-bias training and education in the public schools and with law enforcement, that you fully enforce civil rights laws. All those things that send a message that this is not acceptable in America, that hate is not an American value. You know, countering neo-Nazis and white supremacists, that shouldn't be a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. It's an American value, and that's what we're standing up for. Representative Jones is filing his bill on Confederate statutes. We're once again filing a hate crimes bill to make sure that our hate crime laws are comprehensive, because they're not. Do I believe that law will pass? No, but it sends a message that hate is an unacceptable value in the 21st century in America.
You know, I do want to say that the one thing that we're not going to do, that we can't do, is to be pressured by these despicable hate groups into weakening our First Amendment protections for everybody. The First Amendment is the vehicle that we have, when I say we, everybody in society has, to advocate for and bring about change in policies. There would not have been a civil rights movement in this country without the First Amendment. The First Amendment is an essential tool, and we can't be pressured by out of fear of these hate-filled groups that have always existed in America into weakening that First Amendment.
We shouldn't weaken the First Amendment, Howard, but Dahlia Lithwick wrote a very interesting article about the First Amendment and the Second Amendment butting heads in Charlottesville. And I think the point is this, is that in Charlottesville they tried to move the rally to a different location. The judge rejected that, citing established First Amendment case law, but the decision was silent on what the reality is. The reality is that we had extremists coming to this rally. They weren't there to peacefully protest. If they want to do that, if they want to engage in that, that's
come there
fine.
to knock heads. We are out of time very much. David, thank you for coming in. Howard, great to see you. Representative Jim, good luck with that bill in Tallahassee. We'll follow the debate.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, violence in Venezuela, why government agents there raided the home of the country's former attorney general.
Our correspondent in Caracas, Cody Weddle, is standing by with a live report, and that is right after the break.
All right, we will hear from Cody Weddle in just a few minutes, but right now let's take a closer look at the big issues of the week with our roundtable.
A lot to talk about. Introductions first. Mark Caputo is the Florida correspondent for Politico and author of the daily Politico Florida Playbook. Andrea Robinson is a veteran South Florida journalist and editor and reporter with the Miami Times and formerly with the Miami Herald. Justin Safey is publisher of the Safey Review, a daily roundup of political news and opinion from around the state, and he is also an attorney. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back, I should say, to our veterans.
Great to have you all here.
Thank you.
All right, so Mark Caputo, politics is your beat. We keep saying almost every week, this was the rockiest week yet of the Trump presidency. I've got to say, this was the rockiest week.
Yeah, it seemed like it, but, you know, remember that Donald Trump, he kind of thrives in the chaos. You know, he was sent there by a lot of people who wanted to see him to shake up Washington and to shake up the news media.
Drain the swamp.
Right, and so to a degree, chaos is a deliverable for him. And the more Washington goes insane, and the more things look crazy in the news media, there's a big segment of his supporters that say, that's what we voted for.
Andrea, you reached out this week. I know you have a lot to say this week, as we all do with the events of the week. But my question to you is one that really looks at the other side, what the president would call the other side. There are people watching the events of the week and saying, you know, there is a good case for keeping monuments to the Confederacy in place. Frame that argument for us from your perspective.
To defend having the monument?
No, how do you when you hear that
What is your
defense?
answer when people say it's history, not
yeah.
hate, it's heritage?
Anytime I hear heritage, this isn't about heritage. These monuments were erected at a time when people of African descent were making gains in this country. And the monuments going up were in response to that. The flags going up, or the Confederate flag, states changed, my home state of Mississippi changed its flag as to whatever, with the Confederate flag. It replaced it so they could have that Confederate flag as a nod to the past. No, but for people who look like me, it has no place in this country because it is a symbol of hate.
So why has it taken so long until this week for this issue to bubble up to the top?
I think that it's always been there, but with the candidacy of Mr. Trump, you saw the code language, the code words he used, and we knew what that meant. The birther movement, which he came to political prominence because of that, and the language that he used. We knew that this is going to be ugly, and you saw people like David Duke and some of the other racists come out and say, he's one of us.
Yeah. Justin Safey, you proudly worked for Jeb Bush. You were his communications director. Howard Simon mentioned in our first segment, you know, I think showing credit to Jeb, that he removed some of the Confederate symbols out of the Capitol, put them in the State Historical Museum. This was 10, 12 years ago.
Right.
More than that.
It was in 2001. Governor Bush governed from a perspective of trying to reduce tensions and reduce the divisiveness in our country and our state. And so he made the decision to do that to try to avoid the type of fight and to avoid the type of discussion and debate that we're having now, which is very divisive. Yeah. Because debating whether or not we take down Confederate statues is going to be very divisive because, and I'm not saying it's a debate we shouldn't have, but certainly it's going to polarize this country even further, which really to me is heartbreaking because this is the time we need to come together and stand against both the symbols and the actors of hate. There's one other point though that needs to be made, and that is I'm also heartbroken. It's appropriate that these groups get the attention that they're getting, that they get exposed. But at the same time, I like to also keep it in a larger context of all of the good people of this country that do not hate, that do support loving one another, and that do want to come together. There are millions more of those than there are that are purveyors of hate.
And if I may say, yesterday in Boston, some 40,000 people came out, you know, on behalf of tolerance and love and against bigotry, hate, and violence. They far outnumbered the others who would come out for a free speech rally.
It's Boston also. I mean, it's the birthplace of the abolition movement. It shouldn't surprise you too much.
Right.
But I think that we should have this conversation. Maybe it shouldn't have begun or restarted this way, but we have a problem with race in this country, and it has existed since, I mean, before I came on this earth, and we need to talk about these things because you've had so many rollbacks with civil rights over the last 4 or 5 years with Congress, through Congress, that any gains we've made, we can't even distinguish them anymore. The Voting Rights Act is gutted to the point where, and you see so many states instituting these different, what's the code word now? The voter
ID?
The voter IDs because of all of this.
Yeah, well, those were the courts, not just Congress, that did these things.
But
you're right.
But it was the state legislatures that did it, and it has expanded. It has not abated.
I think North Carolina was the best example of that in the last election.
Exactly, that was totally done because of race and disenfranchisement.
But not to put a rosy face on it, but let's face it, a city in Virginia, the cradle of the Confederacy, is going to take down a Robert E. Lee statue. Like, that is actually symbolic. Like, that's different. We don't see that. We're seeing in Tampa, they're going to remove, more than likely, a statue that was erected in 1911, where the dedicators of that statue said, we're erecting this because we support segregation.
And the 3 professional sport teams in Tampa all pitched in a good deal of money to help pay for the removal.
I agree, though, that removing a statue is not a good balance for removing someone's ability to vote or making it more difficult for them to vote.
Not.
But nevertheless, we are moving in a direction where you're seeing these changes.
But is it going to be substance?
There have been statues removed very quietly. I think the only reason we as a country riveted our attention on this is because of tiki torch carrying neo-Nazis. What would have been the reaction if nobody covered that, if it just went away? Would that have been different?
Well, that's a really good point, because I believe that one of the strategies of these neo-Nazi hate groups is to get this kind of publicity, to do that type of thing, which is why they had this rally. And the internet is actually, as one of your previous speakers said, guest said, that the internet is allowing these people to kind of combine in a way that makes their numbers look larger than I would say they really are in proportion to the population of the United States. So I think part of their strategy is they get all this publicity for a week. It's been, I mean, millions and millions of dollars from their perspective. I wouldn't call it this, from their perspective, of free publicity, which then is a recruitment tool that they use to recruit more followers. So I think we should cover it, but we also need to cover it in the right perspective. That's what's important.
You know, to your point, we just a few minutes ago aired a piece of an interview that our reporter Amy Viteri had done with someone who identifies as a white nationalist who lives in Broward County. Our station, when her story aired this week, got comments along the lines of, why are you giving this man a voice? Which I thought was a very interesting comment. Is it appropriate, Andrea, for us to give that side of society a voice?
I think it's educational because people have covered their ears or have had their head in the sand, and they're surprised about it. They don't know that this exists because it's not a part of their experience. But I think we need to let people know that this is out there. And they could be your neighbors. You don't know. You have no idea who you're next to. And people say black people make things up or we're whining. No, we live this. And I grew up in Mississippi. I know a racist.
I've never heard of anyone say that, for the record. All right, quick break. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. We are in the midst of a very lively and I think very thoughtful roundtable. Justin Safey, let me direct this question to you. I think we all are aware that after moments of great tragedy, the Challenger disaster, the Oklahoma City bombing, the terrible murders in Charleston, North Carolina, Newton, Connecticut, presidents of every party have gone before the American people and have spoken eloquently to the enduring values, what we share together, and how we will endure this tragedy. President Trump had a chance to do that, several chances, and I think that generally speaking, he blew it.
Well, I think that you mentioned several chances. So he made a statement on Saturday, the day of the Charlottesville incidents and murder there, and then he also made another statement on Monday and another statement on Tuesday. And I think it would be helpful for people to go back and read his statements, because I think that people have, and let them speak, let his words speak for themselves, and people should use their own analysis and look at his words. Because on Saturday, he did say we all need to be united against hatred and bigotry, and we need to come together as one. That's what he said. Now, he was criticized for not specifically naming certain groups.
And not speaking quickly enough.
We're not speaking quickly enough. Okay, that's a fair conversation. That's a fair debate to have. It's a fair criticism. But then he comes out on Monday, and then he did criticize those groups by name. But if you listen to the press, it's almost as if he didn't do it. But what he was criticized for was this moral equivalency, I think, was the big argument that a lot of people make against what he said. And I think that that is a legitimate argument to make. However, I don't think enough attention has been given to what the chief of police in Charlottesville said, to what Cheryl Gay Stolberg of the New York Times has reported, which is there's these Antifa protesters that were there, okay, who were there, who had the clubs, who carried sticks with nails in them to stick into police officers, who were part of it. Now, by all means, that was a minority of the people who were there to protest against the fascists and the neo-Nazis and all those people. But I think that part of the argument was lost in all of the concern and all of the upset that took place.
The fundamental problem you have, and that Donald Trump has, is that it's been understood in our society that if someone says Nazi, you say bad. It's very easy, and he failed at that test.
Which he did. No, you look at what he said on Saturday, look at what he said on Monday.
Look at what he said on Tuesday at the Trump Tower.
Right.
I mean, he said very fine people on both sides. I mean, very fine people who are holding Nazi flags.
Right. Well, he meant the ones, not to parse for Donald Trump, he meant the ones nestled in between them. Albeit, I don't understand how, if you're in a parade and everyone around you has a Nazi flag, why you would remain in the parade.
Oh, come on.
I'm saying I would not be among them who would remain in the parade, so I don't understand where he's going.
I'm sorry.
There are, every elected official in every state is now being looked at. What is he or she saying, and what words are he or she using? And it took until this morning. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin put out a statement, actually put out by the White House Communications, as a Jewish man, as a Yale graduate, outlining his opposition to Nazis and what happened. But the question is, why does it take people so long to craft a written statement rather than just coming out and reacting? Although what the president did when he came out and reacted was criticized roundly after that.
The thing is that when Donald Trump finally came out and said something, before, in incidents where guns were involved, terror, if it was the radical Islamic, whatever, immediately you did that. Why can't you say that about these racists, these Nazis, which gave people the impression that he was signing on with them? Now, is that true or not?
Well, David Duke said, "Thank you very much for your courage."
And then, and for him to come out and say that just made people go ballistic.
Yeah. Mark, if I may kind of widen this out a little bit, I think one of the most important aspects of what has happened in the last few days is the top CEOs of American companies have abandoned Donald Trump out of disgust over a lack of moral vision or moral leadership. I think that sends a signal.
And it's not just them who's doing it, or they. It's also the people and the nonprofit groups, cancer society groups that hold fundraisers at Mar-a-Lago. They're starting to withdraw. So at the beginning of Trump's presidency, we kept hearing about how he keeps going to Trump properties to advertise and he's making money off of them. Now they're starting to hit him where it hurts, his pocketbook. So it's an interesting kind of coming full circle or turning 180 maybe that Donald Trump is experiencing. Is like what made him an attractive and interesting media figure is now making him a little too controversial.
And
for
we're
a lot of
also
corporate America.
looking at the ministers, this ministers' council. I think you've only had one person from that group, one black man from that group to resign, and people are asking, well, where are the religious people?
But one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at Donald Trump, not from a moral perspective, but from a purely political perspective, as the President of the United States, who is promoting his point of view, wants to get things done, is he came in as a populist candidate, anti-establishment, anti-elite candidate. So it's not surprising that those in the news media and those in corporate America, the corporate chieftains, the members of Congress, even of his own party, will come out and criticize him. If you look at the Real Clear Politics average of his polling numbers, and if you look at the Quinnipiac poll that came out this week, his polling numbers actually went up with the American people during this whole tragedy. So there's a disconnect between what's
The polls that I see show about a third of Americans strongly approve of the president. That's his core base support. I don't see.
But I'm just saying that this week his support went up.
The reason it did overall
amongst the
is
American
that
people.
He did see a bump in support among self-identified Republicans and conservatives. It's a relatively negligible one, but all in all, he appears to be holding around 35% approval, which is abominable. But he kind of won with those numbers in Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Right.
So
that's the key. You can't. To determine how he might do in a re-election campaign, you can't just look at his approval rating. And
elections are choices.
Is this a seminal moment for him?
I don't think so. I think here's why I say that. For the past year and a half, we've been saying this is it. He's finished. He was finished as a candidate when he criticized John McCain. He was finished as a candidate when the Access Hollywood tape came out. He was finished. People have declared his candidacy dead and his presidency dead over and over again, and yet he sits in the Oval Office as the President of the United States.
All right, hold your thoughts, everyone. We're going to be back in just a minute. All right, on to Venezuela. Its new Constituent Assembly made itself even more powerful this week by stripping legislative powers from the National Assembly, which is dominated by the opposition.
The U.S. State Department called it a power grab as agents of the Maduro government also staged raids on the home of Venezuela's former Attorney General and at a prison during which people were killed. Let's get right to our colleague stationed in Caracas, Cody Weddle, with the latest developments. Cody, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Glenna and Michael. As you guys said, for the second time in just 5 months, opposition leaders here and the National Assembly denouncing what they're saying is a parliamentary coup here. That Constitutional Assembly, a pro-government body, ruling that it will now assume legislative duties. But remember, this in effect won't have much of an impact practically because the Supreme Court here had already been overturning much of the laws made by the National Assembly. But it certainly is important symbolically, as many people fear this new government body will start to sort of push out the opposition here. And you may be asking yourself, why, if the government could already use the Supreme Court to override the National Assembly, did this new pro-government body do this? Well, remember that the government is in desperate need of funds here. They need access to foreign credits. They need to be able to serve foreign debt. The only problem is that the Constitution here requires that the National Assembly approve those deals. So many people believe this is an effort by the government to put those foreign creditors at ease that any deals made with the government will be honored in the future.
Yeah, Cody, let me ask you about, and you've reported on this, there are regional elections which are scheduled, I guess, for later this year, and the opposition has said now it's going to take part in those elections, but that seems to have driven down any of the street protests against the Maduro government that we have seen over you've reported on over the last several months.
That's right. Those protests have basically died down at this point. We haven't seen a significant protest in a few weeks now. The opposition for now saying it needs to participate because it doesn't have any other spaces where it can make its voice heard. But it's also becoming increasingly clear as well that this new government assembly, it has established what's being called a truth commission, and it appears that it will act to sort of disqualify opposition leaders who have participated in protests, which probably will be most of them. So the spaces are really being shut off for the opposition. But for now, they say they will participate, because if they don't participate, the government will just win all of the seats. But now that they will participate, it appears that this new assembly will move to disqualify most of their candidates. So clearly a government tactic to try to divide the opposition any way they can.
Cody Weddle reporting live from Caracas. Cody, as always, thanks very much.
Next, a decades-old barbecue restaurant serves up its own lesson about the future of the Confederacy. Stay tuned.
And here is a look, a wet and cloudy look from our Hollywood beach cam.
And here is a much sunnier person, Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa with the forecast. Hi, Jen.
Good afternoon, Glenna and Michael. I'm glad I'm bringing a little bit of sunshine out there, but not so sunny for much of South Florida. In fact, we're dealing with heavy downpours still for parts of northeast Broward County and all the way down through Miami-Dade as well. But most of the rain in Miami-Dade now pulling away towards the Everglades. And if you look closely right about here over Homestead, that is that flood advisory, which will remain in effect until at least 1:30. Now, a few dotted showers near the Keys. It looks like those could expand and become heavier and wider. So the Keys will also be dealing with showers through much of today. But Broward, Miami-Dade, we should start to dry things out by this afternoon and tonight.
Jen, thanks. More than a decade ago, on a family vacation in Columbia, South Carolina, we ate at a restaurant founded decades earlier by a man who created, besides great barbecue, a shrine to the Confederacy. Maurice Bessinger was a staunch segregationalist, a loud and proud racist, even until his death a few years ago. Back on that day, in full-on mommy mode, that Confederate memorabilia, the photos, they became part of a teachable moment for our then little girls about the Civil War and the ugly lessons from it. Well, fast forward to last year, our news crew back in Columbia for the presidential primaries, we went to that restaurant to find a far different place. No shrine, no memorabilia, not even the Confederate flags anymore. We did find a busy and bustling, still historic, still good barbecue restaurant, now run by the next generation of Bessingers. The son Lloyd told us that when his dad died, what they did what they thought was right. They erased from the business all signs of hate politics and exclusion. As it happens, our crew is actually headed back to Columbia later today to report from the path of totality during tomorrow's historic coast-to-coast solar eclipse. And maybe we'll have a chance to go back to that barbecue restaurant and meet that family again. After this week, that restaurant provides a new teachable moment that this country so needs right now. So, what do you think? We invite you to weigh in on that or any topic you like.
Facebook, email, Twitter, we're at any of these addresses. We're easy to find. An eclipse and good barbecue. Boy, it's such a deal.
And the Confederacy in the past.
Yes, thanks.
All right, have a great and dry Sunday. We'll see you.
Stay informed, get involved.